He's got his coffee fixed, so he's ready to go. So, all right. Hello, Facebook. Hello, Creekwood. Hello, Abundant Life, if anybody's watching. We're really excited to be on again this Wednesday evening for our Wednesday night Pastor Bible study as we are continuing to go through the Gospel of Mark. We're on chapter 9 if you want to get your Bibles out. And for those who may be tuning in later, we would love for you to let us know that you were watching or have any questions, because again, we are studying this all together. But as you tune in right now, we'd love for you to check in and comment that you're here. Because again, the way that we are watching this, it doesn't have that little thing that pops up and says David Lessner is watching. So we don't really know who's watching. We just know how many are watching. So if you can comment along, that way we know who we're talking to. And as we go, we'd love for you to comment along or ask any questions that you have, so that we can interact with you. So I'm going to introduce one of my friends who's joining us today. This is David Briggs, who is the senior pastor of Abundant Life United Methodist Church out in Lufkin, Texas. And David is a friend of mine from a group called Advancing Pastoral Leadership. Y'all got to meet David Horton a few weeks ago from that same group. And so Briggs is joining us. There's so many Davids.
Does your name have to be David to be in APL? Like, is that the precursor to, like, am I out because I'm not David, Keri, Lynn, Lucas?
Yeah, there's actually 4 of us in the same group.
Yeah. Hold a meeting and vote on it.
Yeah, we've had because we had so David Horton joined us and was talking about some of his Gethsemane stuff, and then we had one of Keri Lynn's friends named David Magianes last week, and then so you're the third David special guest in 4 weeks.
Great.
I feel like we need to just put David in parentheses before Keri Lynn, so you fit in, Keri Lynn.
I mean, I didn't get the memo of a dark collared shirt tonight either, so it's not going well for me already.
We're doing our best to make you shine, to stand out from the crowd.
Love that for me.
So, well, for those of you who are tuning in, I see some people popping on. We'd love for you to comment who you are and that you're here, so we can know who's chiming in with us. And again, we got our special guest, David. David, do you want to tell us just a little bit about Abundant Life United Methodist out in Lufkin and anything exciting going on there?
Yeah. Abundant Life is a 28-year-old church here in East Texas, deep East Texas. And Lufkin has a population of about 40,000, but we're kind of considered a hub town because some of the smaller towns that are smaller than Lufkin, they come to Lufkin for shopping and things like that. But nevertheless, we're still considered a rural town. We're in the middle of a neighborhood here in Lufkin, and it's kind of been the DNA of the church since it was established to build a bridge with that community and the neighborhood. So we've always kind of been considered a community church, always in the community, building relationships. They know us, we know them. We have 10 acres. I think that's one of our greatest assets we have as a church. 10 acres right in the heart of this community. And we've been working the last 5 years to develop that property to make it kind of an epicenter for empowerment and discipleship within the community. So we've just been able to move the bar on that by signing a lease with a federal health clinic, and we're finishing up construction on a small preschool in a multi-purpose building that will serve as kind of like a community outreach center.
That's cool.
So these are some of the things we've just been able to bear some fruit on.
That's excellent.
Yeah, David's doing like when you talk to the other people in the Texas conference and the name David Briggs comes up, they talk about what kind of a rock star he is doing out there at Abundant Life in Lufkin. So I think that just confirms all the rumors there. I do want to also mention that I'm fairly certain that David Briggs is the only person in our APL group that can beat me in basketball on a regular instance. He's got a mean jump shot and he plays good defense.
I think you're being way too kind now, David. Yes. I'm gonna slow you down right there.
Yeah, well, we'll see. Hopefully, when we get back to Camp Allen, we can actually try it out and see if my knees still hold up.
Man, missing it.
I miss it too. So, all right. Well, why don't we go ahead and get into it? So, Carolyn, you want to introduce us into chapter 9 here?
Sure. There's a lot of stuff that happens in chapter 9. And so I went into David's office today because so peek behind the curtain. We send the list of questions out to each other and the special guest every week. And I was behind and I did them this morning because I'm the worst. I went into
Or
David
because that's how
Lessner's
it
office.
goes every week.
I'm usually a day ahead in my defense.
I'm not.
It's fine. Everything's fine. But I went into David Lessner's office today and I was like, y'all are going to have to talk fast because we've got stuff to get through because it's long. Chapter 9 is long. There's a lot that happens, but it's really important things. Like you can and should do a sermon over each section of this of Mark chapter 9. So if I had to kind of give like an overview, just kind of from some of the stuff I read this week, we're going to see some rising action, some intensity with Jesus. David Briggs, I may have a bit where I'm not very sensitive, and I called the Jesus that is in the Gospel of Mark jerky Jesus. And then usually I correct and say it's direct communicator Jesus, whichever one you prefer.
She's got a very firm hand.
Yeah, it's my best quality. So we see a little bit of jerk Jesus here or direct communicator Jesus. There's this urgency behind what Jesus is doing. Jesus knows what's coming. Jesus is talking about death and resurrection, right? We're getting to this rising action. This is the last, in chapter 9, we have his last tour through Galilee. So we're going to this pinnacle moment and Jesus starts talking a lot about the kingdom of God. And I think what we're going to see through the eyes of the disciples in chapter 9 is that it's not what everybody thinks it's going to be. And I think if I had to give like a short little for chapter 9 that I wrote at the top of my notes is that the kingdom does not equal the end. The kingdom of God is always thought as an apocalyptic thing. And in this, that Jewish assumption is completely taken down. Through a series of, and I love the way the author of the Gospel of Mark pieces together things that happen and things that are said to kind of juxtapose what's being said isn't always being understood by what's happening. So again, just quick overview of Mark in general. It's short, it's fast, every detail is important, which is really important to remember here in chapter 9. And there's just a very interesting person of Jesus if you take Mark by itself. So that's kind of the only overview I have, unless kind of Mark overall, either one of you have anything you want to add?
David, anything you want to just say about I've done my piece for a couple of weeks. So anything you want to add about the entire Gospel of Mark or?
About the entire Gospel of Mark. I think that I always thought it was interesting how Mark, Keri, like how you were mentioning how short it is and how it doesn't mention a lot of the stories that many of us are familiar with, like a lot of the great stories and miracles that we're familiar with. They're found in the other Gospels, like Luke and John, for example, like the parable of the Good Samaritan. That's in Luke. The parable of the prodigal son, that's in Luke. And the Lord's Prayer, that's in Matthew. The Beatitudes, that's in Matthew. The Golden Rule is in Matthew. The Mary and Martha scene, the woman at the well, that's in John. Just so many of these when you think about the gospel, so many of these passages of scripture that seem to stick with us. They're not in Mark. They're in Luke and John and Matthew. And so Mark just gives us this very concise narrative of the life of Jesus, almost as if it was intended to be read in one sitting, as opposed to giving us, this collection of Jesus's greatest hits. He just gets right to the point. I just think that's an interesting literary style.
Yeah.
And whenever we,
Go ahead.
I would say whenever we do preach like the feeding of the 5,000 and some of the greatest hits that do appear in Mark, nobody ever preaches from Mark. When we do that, we always take the Luke or the Matthew or the John version, probably because it has more detail, to it.
Yeah. Well, and then the feeding of the 4,000 that happens in chapter 8 is almost never preached on. The fact that in Mark, he did it twice. So yeah, I think David Briggs, I mean, you're both brilliant, but David Briggs, that was a brilliant point. You think about like a greatest hits album from an artist, right? Doesn't always give you the full scope of what was happening in a particular season for an artist. And so, some of Jesus's not greatest hits are in Mark, which is why we love to read it. So yeah, thank you for that. So we're going to start. So, David already knows, but just for anybody joining us, the way we kind of do this is we read a section. We go verse by verse, really. We read a section, and usually I've come up with a very difficult discussion question. None of the questions tonight are light and fluffy, so we'll just get right to it. But we would love for you to respond in the comments, or if you have questions that you want the Davids to answer with all of their brilliance, throw that in there as well. They're always up to a challenge, or so that we're learning. So we're going to start right on ahead. So here is Mark chapter 9. This is verses 1 through 8. And it actually starts with the finishing of the last story, which is weird. So it says, and he said to them, truly, I tell you, there are still some standing here that will not taste death until they see that the kingdom of God has come with power. 6 days later, Jesus took with him Peter and James and John and led them up on a high mountain apart by themselves. And he was transfigured before them, and his clothes became dazzling white, such as no one on earth could bleach them. And there appeared to them Elijah and Moses, who were talking with Jesus. Then Peter said to Jesus, Rabbi, it is good for us to be here. Let us make 3 dwellings, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. He did not know what to say, for they were terrified. Then a cloud overshadowed them, and someone from the cloud. Then from the cloud there came a voice, this is my son, the beloved, listen to him. Suddenly, when they looked around, they saw there was no one with them anymore, but only Jesus. So just a couple of notes here. So we see the group of the disciples has been dwindled down to the main 3 that get to do all the fun things. Peter, James, and John.
The A team, yeah.
I don't know if you can say Jesus played favorites. Like, I don't know if that's heretical, but it is the 3 who get to have the most fun in the Gospels. They get to see the coolest stuff. So just a couple of notes. When it talks about Jesus's clothes being white, again, we're thinking about if this was read partial Jewish audience, partial Gentile audience. So Jewish audiences would have certain assumptions. And so one of those assumptions is when white clothes are mentioned, if you're Jewish, it like kind of pings your brain a little bit and you think, oh my goodness, this is from Daniel. So Daniel chapter 7, verse 9 has this same description of bright white clothing, but it was described to be the ancient one. And Daniel is apocalyptic literature, which is always interesting to interpret and difficult. And we've watched the interpretation of apocalyptic literature really shift over time. So in apocalyptic literature, things that are white, like clothing, means that things are righteous, or things that are white are heavenly. It's usually when something's ascending or when something is going to come down from heaven. So this kind of almost apocalyptic moment that you see in a gospel text, which is not apocalyptic really in nature, is one of these really cool, kind of heavenly, fun mountaintop moments. And Peter, his reaction is so interesting, right? He immediately is like, let's build something that remarks this cool moment. This is a great time. Where just before this, if you were with us last week, when Jesus started talking about the fact that he was going to die, Peter immediately was like, no, man, I'm out. Like this, no, thank you. And it's the same guy. And so Peter has this argument with Jesus about the passion, but then he approves of this heavenly moment, and he wants to cast it in stone. He wants to build a monument to this heavenly moment. And so the question that I have for David and David is, I think that the moment before is this really sticky, uncomfortable moment. Jesus talking about his own death is not fun. It's really uncomfortable. The transfiguration was awesome. And so what are the sticky or uncomfortable elements of faith in our faith life that we maybe argue or we struggle with, or even like protest in opposition to like those really more fun and powerful and meaning heavenly moments? And then kind of a follow-up question is, why is it important to have both?
Yeah.
You want to jump in first, David?
Sure. I'll jump in. I'll just say that I believe no one likes pain. No one likes trouble. No one likes adversity. So I think we are all naturally hardwired to want to pull away from those things and to shun those things and do our best to not experience those things, find our way around those things. But the Bible doesn't look at adversity and difficulties in that manner. Even though we want to reject them and make sure that our life has as few of those moments as possible, the Bible actually talks about some of the benefits of those painful and difficult moments in our lives. And one passage of scripture that's caused me to ponder ever since the first time that I've ever read it is Romans chapter 5, verses 3 through 4. And Romans 5, 3 and 4 says, not only so, but we also glory in our sufferings, because we know that suffering produces perseverance, and perseverance character, and character hope. And hope does not put us to shame, because God's love has been poured out into our hearts through the Holy Spirit who has been given to us. And so the Bible talks about troubles and difficulties as something that can produce something in our lives. Not that we should go looking for pain and trouble, but if it happens to find us, we can rest assured that that pain and trouble won't be wasted, but it will actually refine us and bring out of us a kind of quality of character or virtue, if you will, and draw us closer into a relationship with God. And we don't always want to look at our troubles that way, but I think that's a beautiful perspective that the Bible gives us.
Yeah, I was at a seminar with Rob Bell, who's an author and used to be a pastor at one point, and he just kind of went around the room and just said real quickly, "Tell me the time you felt closest to God." And people had different stories about how long it took to feel, but it was like when my dad was sick, when and it was all of these stories that were counterintuitive to our naturally good feelings, and so we talk about God as this good feeling and one who brings peace and joy and love and grace and all the good things. But overwhelmingly, everybody mentioned some instance of pain and suffering, like you were saying, that was when God was closest to them. And so Rob then kind of finalized and he said, so why do we run from those? Why don't we feel those? Why don't we live in those for a little bit and see that God is a redemptive God? Like there's always a future with God, and God turns those into moments. Because I'm thinking about, like, I think there's a lot in the Transfiguration story and Peter's reaction that kind of speaks to the new versus the old. And I think Mark is a combative gospel about the new conquering the old, I guess. Like in Judaism, there really is no then, there is no next. It's, you kind of just fade away, and it's more about how do we honor God now. And we've got Jacob building all the altars and Abraham building all the altars, and It's the what do I do now and how do I cement the legacy for the next generation, versus some of Christianity is that, but some of Christianity is also there's something else. There is eternal life, there is abundant life, there is resurrected life, and Jesus, I feel like, is through this apocalyptic moment saying, okay, the kingdom has come, resurrected life is here, and then the power to give you something next. And immediately Peter doesn't call him Messiah, he calls him Rabbi. So he reverts back and says, let's build something, right? Let's make it permanent. Let's not lose it. Um, so I think the sticky or uncomfortable part is almost the same as the joyful part, um, in death and heaven. Like, we love to talk about heaven. I mean, we preach about resurrection every Easter, and it's a fanfare, and we do it with great excitement. But as soon as we're faced with the notion of resurrection or of death, we instantly try and build something, or get away from it as fast as possible. So I think the most exciting parts of our faith are often the most difficult as well. So I appreciate David bringing in that Romans passage, because there's just so much. There's just so much of good that God does with hurt that we hate that people hurt. So maybe it's not the hurt, but it's the discomfort, in all that. So I don't know if that answers your question or not, but
That's okay. I think it does. So I think I would pose like another follow-up question, and maybe this is for the comments, and if you choose to be vague, that's totally fine. But what is something that, whether you or maybe either of you want to share about, like somebody you've seen in a pastoral situation that has had that painful experience that you've watched their faith totally grow and blossom and even snap into something new because of it? And I'd pose the same question to those who are watching.
So I immediately can speak. I mean, not personally, I can immediately speak for watching congregation members, especially older adults who lose their spouse that they've had for like 30 to 40 to 50 to 60 years. And I see them lose their spouse, which is a devastating. I mean, I can't even imagine the pain of that, especially someone you've shared life with so intimately for so long. And when that rock of a connection disappears, um, a lot of them turn to the church, very heavily, and in that they're sad, they're broken, and they turn to the church, and they just sign up for everything, because there's something to do and there's someone to be around, and as they do that, they start reading the Bible more, and they start falling in, they start experiencing more of that even though that rock of relationship is gone, there's this kind of eternal relationship that doesn't ever go away. And so, like, I would never wish the death of a spouse on anybody, but I have seen that people who have lost their wives or husbands later in life tend to find this, like, 5 years afterward, they'll come and they'll say, like, oh my gosh, I never knew how much God loved me before. I never felt this way before. So it's kind of a beauty in the midst of something I never wish on my worst enemy.
Yeah. I'm with you 100%, David. I've experienced that as well. When I first got here to Abundant Life, the members come and they want to let you know who they are, so they tell you their story. And many of them told me their story of how they ended up in the church. And it was usually something, the death of a relative or a bad, accident that happened or something like that. And they found themselves sitting in a chair in the church, and they've been there ever since.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there's a correlation there. But unfortunately, I think, I've talked to some people who don't go to church. And I've asked them, what's the deal? What's going on? Where do you see God in your life? And they'll tell me as well that they've had some tragic situation happen to their life, and they, and it really broke them and hurt them, and actually kept them from the church, or kept them from, building a relationship with God. So I think in those moments of great pain, perspective is everything. I think some people just find comfort in God and being in the community with other believers. And some are broken and wounded, and they continue to be broken and wounded, and not really find they don't really find that healing unless someone encounters them and helps to nurture them through their pain. So it's just an interesting thing that can happen when people encounter tragic situations.
Yeah, I think that tragedy provides the discomfort. Like Peter is uncomfortable by this situation, and then they hear the voice that says, "This is my son," and just after he called him Rabbi as opposed to Messiah or the Son of God, which he's proclaimed before, and um, so there is a little bit about discomfort. I think life brings that discomfort sometimes. God doesn't totally, God does not cause anyone, your loved one to die. Please hear me on that.
Sure.
So I think life brings that discomfort, and in that discomfort, God is very clearly, it can be very clearly seen, or makes God's self very clearly visible in that time.
Yeah. So Kathy and Laura both responded about some family members and seeing God's comfort and God's peace come through those situations. So Kathy and Laura, thank you for
Thank
sharing
you.
and for showing up and showing up so fully in that. But we have to move on, or we're never going to get through chapter 9. So I hate to move on from that moment. So thank you for sharing, Kathy and Laura, and David as well. But we're going to do verses 9 through 13. It says, "And they were coming down the mountain. He ordered them to tell no one about what they had seen. So they kept the matter to themselves, questioning what this rising from the dead could mean. Then they asked him, 'What do the scribes say Elijah must come first?' He said to them, 'Elijah is indeed coming first to restore all things. How then is it written about the Son of Man that he is to go through many sufferings and to be treated with contempt? But I tell you that Elijah has come, and they did to him whatever they pleased, as it is written about him.'" So I think so first of all, this coming of Elijah, if you are needing to do or just desire to have extra homework, if you want to read Malachi chapter 4, verses 5 and 6, that's kind of where this reference is coming. We're seeing Jesus reference a lot of old Jewish texts in this chapter. But I think what we're seeing here is Elijah coming first was a lot of people looked at John the Baptist's role, right? John the Baptist came and prepared the way and baptized people before Jesus arrived. And we see this even before they're born, that John the Baptist understands his role even when he's in his mother's tummy. Like, it's a whole weird, interesting, apocalyptic thing. And so we're going to run with this assumption in interpreting this, that Elijah that's being prophesied in Malachi is the John the Baptist character that we saw, and narratively Mark talked about his death earlier. And so I think what's happening here is the disciples they're like, well, okay, but what's supposed to happen here? Like, what's going on? Where's Elijah? And I think they misunderstand John the Baptist's role. And in a little bit here, I think we'll also see them misunderstand Jesus's role. Because again, their perception of Messiah was supposed to be this dude like running through town, cutting people's heads off that messed up. And that's not what's happening here. And so,
And where did Jesus go wrong anyway?
It just, is that what you really want?
Yeah.
And so, but what's interesting is that, so the disciples aren't getting John the Baptist's role, but the reader knows, right? It's told from the very beginning, this is the gospel, this is the beginning of the good news of Jesus Christ, the Son of God. And then it talks about John the Baptist, and then we hear about John the Baptist's death and how he's wildly mistreated and he's beheaded, and it's gross. And if you're trying to put your kids to bed while watching Bible study, I'm sorry. But what I want to get to the point here is with John the Baptist and with Jesus in both of their deaths, which we see talked about here, they are truth tellers, and truth tellers are mistreated. And if there's something that I wish wasn't true in 2020 that I think is true, and we can all agree on all sides and spectrums and political whatevers, is that truth tellers are mistreated. And so the question I have for the two of you is, what is it about the truth that even in Jesus's time and now in our time is so challenging. Why is the truth so challenging? And then why do we mistreat truth tellers? I told you there's no light questions.
That's good. I'm just thinking about like when my children like are playing, doing something, and whether they have friends over or just by themselves, and then one of them runs down and yells and tattles on the first one, and then the other one will immediately come down and like slander the first one. Just to, and you can always kind of tell that whoever says it first is probably right because they're the one. I mean, they might have misinterpreted the situation, but they're probably right because they're aggrieved and they see the truth, and and what was supposed to be right and just didn't happen the way it was supposed to. So they're coming and telling the truth about what the situation was, and the second one's just trying to keep out of trouble, running down and yelling and tattling. And so there's a little bit, I think, of the truth teller is going to get somebody in trouble. They're going to disrupt the status quo. I mean, when I look at all of the prophets, they're either walking around naked or they're eating locusts, or they're just, I mean, they're kind of weirdos. And we know God uses weird people to do the message. I mean, that's Creekwood's story probably in the last at least 5 years, or definitely in the last year. But
10 out of 10 can confirm.
Absolutely, yeah. So, but I think that the kind of like, I mean, kind of go back to the reference of the kids, like the truth teller is somebody who sees what's happening that's unjust. They kind of see the truth being forgotten in the behavior, and the other people know that like that's going to get them in trouble. Like if they're the ones who are not living up to the normal, or not the normal, they're not living up to the ideal. They're just part of the norm. They don't want to change the norm because they don't want to get in trouble. I don't know, David, did you expect what do you think?
You know, this question is such a beautiful question, such a soul probing question. Um, I really appreciate it, and I wish I could read those comments and things like that, because it really is rich. Truth is why are truth tellers so often mistreated? And when I think about it, at the end of the day, truth is reveals who we really are, and that causes a lot of resistance, especially if you don't want to see yourself. If you know, if you don't want to really know what's going on, if the truth is threatening power, if the truth is threatening some kind of system or structure, then that truth is going to be seen as an enemy, and it's going to be vanquished. So, and that's on a social level. But even if we look at it on a personal level, how many times have we read something in the Bible that really stepped on our toes, and we just kept reading?
Yeah.
You just keep reading and find something better. And I've never seen anyone put on a bumper sticker, like a real convicting Bible. It's always, asking you shall receive or something like that.
Yeah.
But no one puts any, convicting words from the prophet, because the truth.
I'm going to throw myself in a lake with a millstone around my neck, y'all. Follow me there.
You never see those. And so, because truth reveals ourselves, and it causes pain, it causes change, and I think it's good medicine. And I think if we take it, we'll be better as individuals and better as a society. But it's going to always be a resistance to truth.
When it's almost like, to extend your metaphor, it's like medicine that doesn't taste good.
Yeah.
But it's going to make you better. Like, it doesn't matter that the grape flavored cough syrup tastes horrible. Like, it's going to make your cough go away. The problem is not that it tastes bad. The problem is that you have a cough. But we're upset that the cough medicine tastes bad.
And the bad thing, Keri, is that some of us have this Mary Poppins theology, and just a spoonful of sugar will help the medicine go down.
Not the next day.
And we just sugarcoat some of the hard things that Jesus has to say to the church and to people. We sugarcoat it, we cover it up. But John the Baptist, you brood of vipers, never did. And Jesus,
Mm-hmm.
who flipped over the tables and whitewashed tombs, and Jesus never put sugar to the medicine.
Yes, that's so
Yeah.
good.
And I wonder, like, so we were talking about 2020. So I'm looking at the disciples' reaction of like, why did the scribes say that Elijah must come first? And like part of it seems like individual cluelessness, but part of me wonders if they're trying to avoid their certainty being upset, as like Peter's just tried to build temples as opposed to just accepting that the temple is inside of him or the world is a temple. Um,
Or
Part of me
just
is like,
enjoy the moment. Like it's just,
right.
bro.
So like part of me wonders if they're with Jesus, but they're resistant to it because it's going to kill the certainty that they already have to go into the unknown of the hard medicine and the hard thing. And so what I find is when people are experiencing hard truth, they like to come back with a question they probably already know the answer to,
Mm-hmm.
but they ask the question because somebody else will answer something differently.
Yeah.
And that's where I think we see some of the like the conspiracy theories um, that are rampant in our world right now. Is it's our so I'm uncomfortable or I don't like what the prophet is saying, so therefore I'm going to challenge him with a question, because if I challenge him with a statement, that means I'm bigoted or that means or whatever. But I'm going to throw a
Right.
different statement out there. I'm going to throw a different question out there so that it creates reasonable doubt. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious if the disciples are like, yeah, but why does Elijah have to come first? Because John the Baptist got beheaded. We don't want to get beheaded. John the Baptist was
We're
crazy.
uncomfortable. Yeah.
Yeah, we're uncomfortable. So if they pose a question in response to the uncomfortableness, it doesn't implicate them, and it opens up a whole line of dialogue to where we might already know truth, but let's come up with 7 other options because we don't like what the truth is. And I think that's where I think like I would say that some of the truth tellers in 2020 aren't necessarily being like they're not being martyred, for
They're
lack
not
of a
being
better
beheaded.
word. They're not being beheaded, but the truth tellers are being discredited
Yeah.
by questions that don't need to be asked.
Yeah.
Who is
Yeah.
What?
who is my neighbor?
Right. Or what is truth from Pilate, right? You know, questions that just don't need to be asked because it's staring you in the face. I mean, Jesus is right there pointing you who the neighbor is, or telling you the truth. And um, I think the most inappropriate questions are asked because they deflect the uncomfortableness of, I want to say a statement, but I know if I say it, I'm totally going to be wrong.
And sometimes too, like, wouldn't asking a question to a challenge, like the person who's responding with the question and creating this, like, well, so why do those scribes say that Elijah da 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 da? Like, there's this power that the disciples don't have that they're trying to reclaim with their question. Like, let me prove to you I still know some stuff, Jesus, but I'm going to make it a question so I don't look totally like a fool who tried to build some statues up on a mountain.
Mm-hmm.
And so even that grasp and that reaching and that almost just like wildly intense stretch for power with a ridiculous question, right? Like that, it just the what's happening in here is not right when that's happening. Does that make sense? Um, okay, we have to move on. Sorry. There's just so much in chapter 9.
I do think
But
Jesus is like acing his sarcasm game, however, in this statement again. Like he's really rolling with direct communicator Jesus in this moment.
it's about to happen.
It ramps up.
Here we go. All right, so here is, we're going to do, it's going to be a longer section. So this is verses 14 through 29. When they came to the disciples, they saw a great crowd around them and some scribes arguing with them. When the whole crowd saw him, they were immediately overcome with awe, and they ran forward to greet him. And he asked them, "What are you arguing about with them?" Someone from the crowd answered him, "Teacher, I brought you my son. He has a spirit that makes him unable to speak. And whenever it seizes him, it dashes him down. He foams and grinds his teeth and becomes rigid. And I asked your disciples to cast it out, but they could not do so. He answered them. This is my favorite. You can't not laugh when you hear this part about Jesus. He answered them, "You faithless generation, how much longer must I be among you? How much longer must I put up with you? Bring him to me." And they brought the boy to him. When the spirit saw him, immediately it convulsed the boy, and he fell on the ground and rolled about, foaming at the mouth. Jesus asked the father, "How long has this been happening to him?" And he said, "From childhood. It has often cast him into the fire and into the water to destroy him. But if you were able to do anything, have pity on us and help us." Jesus said to him, "If you are able, all things can be done for the one who believes." Immediately the father of the child cried out, "I believe, help my unbelief." When Jesus saw that a crowd came running together, he rebuked the unclean spirit, saying to it, "You spirit that keeps this boy from speaking and hearing, I command you, come out of him and never enter him again." And crying out and convulsing him terribly, it came out, and the boy was like a corpse, so that most of them said, "He's dead." But Jesus took him by the hand and lifted him up. And when he was able to stand, when he had entered the house, his disciples asked him privately, "Why could we not cast it out?" He said to them, "This kind can only come out through prayer." So, just a couple of notes again. So, the disciples that were not the three that were with Jesus were unable to cast out this unclean spirit. But they had already been given authority to cast out unclean spirits, like in chapter 2. Like
Yeah.
in Mark, let's get down to business. That happened so early. And so I think that this story kind of plays together the relationship between faith and prayer. Because the question is they were given authority to cast out unclean spirits. What happened? Like, was it just a temporary loan of the cool ability to cast out demons and they forgot to pay it back? Like, what's happening here? And I think about this what Jesus says, all things can be done for the one who believes. And then this father says the words, "I believe, help my unbelief." And a lot of commentaries point to it's that what he says is what changes it. It's not the disciples' inability. And they're concerned about their inability. They're not concerned about what's happening with this father, but it's the father's belief and even his asking of Jesus to help the pieces of him that don't believe that cause this healing to take place. And so the question I have is, where have you seen a prayer like this become a prayer, "I believe, help my unbelief"? Where have you seen it in your ministry or in your personal life, and in ways in which it's brought about significant healing for people?
So I can lead off with the kind of the story part of it. Is like there are two men I'm working with, one younger man, one I would say middle-aged guy, who just various circumstances have gotten themselves into some, I would say, spiritual and trouble, just misdirection in life, maybe took a wrong step along the way, and the turnaround in their life was the recognition that they didn't know anything. That they had been so certain and they had been so confident in what they were doing, that when that confidence led them to a place of having to drop out of school, or or other kind of vices that I won't disclose, is everything that they knew to be true and everything they knew to be certain, everything they believed would happen in their lives kind of got taken away, and the only thing that was left was God. And so the prayer that started to happen on their lips was, if I were to rephrase it, is, "Okay, God, I believe, show me how to believe, or show me that I believe, or show me what to believe." Or and so it was there was a confidence that God would do something, or a confidence that God would work, but they had no idea what it was. And there was a little bit of that humility that actually turned their life around. Actually, I would say a whole lot of their humility that turned their life around, because instead of going in and saying, "Okay, I know exactly what God wants and I'm going to achieve it, right? I'm going to heal this person because I know that this is what God wants." It became more of a, "Okay, I know God is doing something. I wonder how I can be a part of this, or please show me how I can be a part of this." Um, and the ability to kind of live in mystery for a little while has led them down some really wonderful paths of healing, in knowing that God is with them even when they're totally uncertain. So I think there's some level of story I've seen. If I were to rephrase the, I believe, help my unbelief, it's I believe, can you show me what to believe in? Um, and reveal what's going on as we go, because I see that in the disciples. It's kind of like I was given this power and this authority, um, and so look at me, look what I can do. Um, but Jesus is the one who's constantly pointing back to the Father. Jesus is constantly pointing back to God and saying, I'm not here for you to look at me. I'm here for you to, look past me and to God. And so I'm curious if the disciples got into a place where they were like, I know what I can do. I'm awesome. I can heal this person. And Jesus is saying, well, that's not really how it happens. Like, how it happens is you say, yeah, I believe that something's going on and I hope I can be a part of it. And God, can you show me what I can do right now? And go from there.
David, Briggs, do you have any thoughts or any I believe help my unbelief stories?
I don't think I have any stories. I just think that phrase is a very powerful but and yet overlooked phrase.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes we believe that to believe is to have certainty, and we confuse those two. That when one says they believe or have faith for God to do X, Y, Z, some people believe that means that I'm certain. I know for a fact that, God's going to heal, my relative, or that, God's going to do this or do that for me because the Bible tells me to believe, and I just know it's going to be true, and I'm certain. But to believe or to have faith, I'm using those two synonymously. Uh, that doesn't mean to be certain. It just means to hope, to hope and to trust. It means that I'm trusting that God will do something or move in a particular way. I don't know what that is. I don't know what that's going to look like, but I'm just going to rest in the fact that I trust God with this situation. I'm not certain of how it's going to turn out or how it's going to pan out or how God's going to move. I can't look at God's notes and tell you what God is going to do, but I trust God to be good, and I trust God to be merciful and kind. And so how, Romans 8:28, I trust that this is going to work out for our good.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't have to be certain to believe.
If you do find God's notes, can you put them on like a tablet or something and start passing them around?
No,
Make
I'll
it a
hold them
Google
all
Doc.
and I'll sell out at conventions and things
There
like
you
that.
go. Barnes and Noble.
Boy.
Let's
Oh
see.
boy. And with that, we're gonna move on. But thank you both for that. I think that
Well, so hold on. I guess one thing I want to, because we've been talking about faith and belief and all, and one thing I do, and you put this in your question in your notes, is I do want to, throughout Mark, I've been fascinated by this, but I like in Mark, in much more than any other place in the Bible that I've read, there seems to be a correlation between, or there has been up until this point, a correlation between, well, it's your faith that has healed you, right? And we've gotten in discussions about like, well, are those people who are not being healed not having enough faith, right? And the disciples do they not have enough faith, or they didn't pray enough? And I think that this story, I actually do think highlights kind of what David and a little bit of what I was talking about is um, the healing comes because they're just putting it in God's hands and trusting. It's not the level of faith that they have; it's the level of promise that God provides, and being able to humbly know that anything that I do or any prayer I say is not going to cast out the demon or heal the epileptic or whatever. It's all about saying, okay, in this situation, we're going to rely on what God has given us and what God can do. I think it goes to the scene in the Transfiguration when, if Jesus is this apocalyptic Daniel figure coming and saying the kingdom of God is here, well, if the kingdom of God is here, then we trust that God has got, I don't want, I hate to saying God's got control, but like we're going to say that God is in this situation. And so whether that healing comes in death, whether that healing comes in life, it's all part of the resurrection story. And I'm just going to let it go right now. And so I think that I think this story kind of speaks against what Mark has been saying so far, that people who have great faith are instantly going to get healed. I think it puts it in the plate of saying, God is the one who's doing all the healing. God is the one behind all the restoration. Our job is to kind of humbly get on board with that and trust that God is working all things for good.
Yeah. Yeah, David, I appreciate you lifting that up, because that concept of if you don't get what you want from God, then you're lacking faith idea is truly plaguing the church.
Yeah.
And it is almost to the point to where people feel that if they prayed and asked and prayed and asked and it didn't happen, then number one, maybe I don't have enough faith, or if I'm confident I do believe God enough, then maybe God is not real. Maybe God is really not there. Maybe my prayers are just bouncing off the ceiling. But again, I think that premise that if you're not getting what you want is because you're not believing enough, it's wrong on so many levels. And number one, I'll be brief. There are people in the Bible who asked for things and didn't get them, but still believed. And the first one that comes to my mind is Mary and Martha. When Martha asked Jesus to heal her brother, come, he's sick, the one who you love. And Jesus took his precious time and allowed Lazarus to die. Now, she asked Jesus to come and heal him and to help him, but he didn't. And he showed up late. And when he showed up, Mary was so upset that she didn't even come out to see him. But Martha comes out, and the first thing she said was, Jesus, if you'd have been here,
Right.
my brother would not have died. I mean, that's an indictment against Jesus because of his negligence. You're late. But then Jesus goes through this whole spell about, I'm the resurrection and the life. Do you believe that, Martha? And she said, Lord, I believe, even while her brother was still dead and rotting in the tomb. And I believe that there's something beautiful about not getting what you asked for your expectations and your plans to be shattered. But in the midst of all of that, still trusting that Jesus is who Jesus said that he is, that he's still the life, he's still the resurrection, he's still the answer, even when things don't go your way. That's a kind of belief that's not shaken by your circumstances, but it's grounded in something deeper than what's going on around you.
And I think for Jesus, life and death are way less dualistic than we make them to be. I think that we think of death as
in Jewish culture, it wasn't too, right? Like in Jewish culture, like there were things that tended towards death and things that tended towards life, and that was clean and unclean, and there was spectrum of clean and unclean. Like it's a very, I would argue, even like Western understanding of life and death being the have and the have-nots, because we exist in a neither here nor there, have not, rich, poor, Republican, Democrat world, when really, like, that's from the very beginning, is from, like, God never understood death to be not life. There was a spectrum of it. There were things that tended towards death in those early Jewish laws. I didn't mean to interrupt you. I just had that thought.
No, that's fine. You said it way better than I did. So I was just going to end with, I once was at a church where they opened up with the Rolling Stones. It was, you can't always get what you want, but if you try sometimes, you get this might find, you get what you need. And then they went into this whole sermon on how most of the time we get what we need when we stop asking for what we want. In there. So now we can move on. Now that I've embarrassed myself.
Now we actually have to move on. Like at some point we have
I'll hit start me up in some other jumping jack flash after we're all done.
This is what happens like every day of our lives.
I can sing more Rolling Stones in the office if you want. I've got a whole Beatles catalog in my mind too.
All right. This is verses 30 through 32. They went from there and passed through Galilee. He did not want anyone to know it, for he was teaching his disciples, saying to them, "The Son of Man is to be betrayed into human hands. They will kill him, and 3 days after being killed, he will rise again." But they did not understand what he was saying, and they were afraid to ask him. So the question that I would ask quickly is why do you think the disciples were afraid to ask Jesus? And what are we afraid to ask of God now? And why is that the case?
Yeah, this kind of goes to going back to talking about the genre of Mark. Mark, the disciples are not very in tune with Jesus in Mark. There are just so many places where the disciples get it wrong. In fact, it only seems like the only thing that they did right was drop their nets. After that, it was just downhill from there. In Mark 8, verses 31 and 33, Jesus literally, Peter literally rebukes Jesus. When Jesus talks about going to the cross, Peter pulls him to the side and rebukes him. And then we have this piece here in the text where it says that they didn't understand, what Jesus was talking about. And then in Mark 10, you have the disciples jockeying for positions of power. Jesus, can I sit here when you get ready to rule? Can I have some of your powers? Like, they completely don't understand what's going on. And then, of course, even Jesus gets weary of the disciples from the passage you read earlier, where he said, I'm just, how long do I call? You're just not getting the point. And I don't know if Mark is trying to help us to understand that Jesus didn't select rock stars, but he selected regular people who, just like us, who don't get it most of the time. And nonetheless, that God works through that thickness and still allows us to, do great things in the world in his name. So, you don't have to be great to do great things. There's no greatness that's a qualification to be a follower of Jesus. You just have to be one that's willing to submit and to seek the Lord. So for me, I think it's a good thing that the disciples aren't like VIP Christians.
Yeah.
But they're kind of like us, so we can kind of see ourselves in the narrative.
I think that was the best job of seeing the grace in this passage that I've ever found or ever heard in my entire life. Like, we could sit here and talk about how stupid the disciples are over and over again.
My favorite pastime.
Right. I mean, we could sit here and just talk about how awful they are, and instead David Briggs turns it around and is like, yeah, but that means that we can be part of this too, right? Because we're all stupid on some level. So that was the best job of seeing grace in Jesus's annoyance that I think I've ever heard from this passage. So thank you for that. I do wonder, like, I think it's so interesting though, when they're afraid, like, and on some level, Jesus has shut him down a couple times. Like, golly, how long do I have to be with y'all? And Peter, get behind me, Satan. I mean, it's just like, it reminds me of, growing up, and you're at, it's the kid in class who I was kind of this kid in class that, where you're in US history or biology or whatever, and you are not totally understanding, or you want to dive a little deeper, and you keep asking the teacher, who has 29 other kids to worry about. And the teacher is just like, oh my gosh, how many questions is this kid going to ask? We got to move on to the next section. And so finally they lose it, like with their annoyance, they lose it a little bit and they snap. And then the next thought in your mind is, I don't want to mess with that person again. Like, either my grade's on the line, or so I just find it fascinating that the disciples have had this experience and they're a little afraid because of their idiocy or confusion or whatever. Yet I constantly tell people to ask questions to God. When I'm doing, when people come in, they say I'm angry at God. God took away my pet or my mom or my brother or my sister or whatever. And I just have all these questions, and we tell our kids, like, it's okay to ask God questions. It's okay to ask these hard things. And I would say I'm proud of the Methodist Church because we're allowed to use our brains when we go to church, and we encourage people to use our brains. So it's just an interesting juxtaposition in which, I don't know. I don't even know what to make of it, but the disciples are literally afraid to ask Jesus a question. And I don't know if it's that rough edge of Jesus that we were talking about earlier, that Jesus didn't sugarcoat things, that in our 21st century world, we have sugar-coated things so much that Jesus is actually at our beck and call to where we can go call Jesus out. Because again, it's kind of that heavenly things versus disruptive things. If I were sitting at the footstool of the throne of Jesus, there's no way I'm going to look at him and be like, dude, why were you thinking about making the duck-billed platypus look like that anyway? What were you thinking? There's no way that I'm going to do that. I'm going to be incredibly humbled and incredibly reverent. Yet in the sugar-coated Jesus world that I live in, where I don't get what I want, I'm perfectly happy to question Jesus. And I'm perfectly happy to tell other people to question Jesus because in my theological construct, God can handle it. And we're at least talking to God instead of denying God or losing God. So it's just interesting. I don't know what we would be afraid to ask God right now, because I think it has become very okay to put God on the chopping block. I think David was talking about earlier, like when people lose people, they will sometimes go away from the church because they're mad at God. And so Jesus, I mean, a little bit of the rough edge Jesus is like, look, get behind me and follow me or not, versus kind of a overwhelming notion of grace of, look, God can handle whatever you've got to throw at him. Just be mad. It's fine. So I don't know what to make of that, but I find it an interesting juxtaposition.
So I am curious as to this thought I have rummaging now that may or may not be a question by the time I say it. So we'll find out. But
Yay, I'm in the middle now.
Yeah, welcome. The Davids are together.
Everybody's fine. We're all here. It's still live. That was great. Okay. Anyways, so I'm just curious about, I went away. That's really a bummer. Anyways, I'm just curious about what you both would think of this idea of, so I think when people have these extreme losses, I think they come and they question their pastor. I don't think they ask God. And because I think there would be that peace that surpasses all understanding. That's a really cheesy bumper sticker thing to say. But I would really push back on the notion on some of that, because I do think there are questions we're not asking God. And I think we think if we ask our pastors, we're asking God. And we pull a little like Moses and the Israelites on them. Because I don't know. I think if Jesus were sitting right in front of me, there would be some questions that I wouldn't ask, that I would say to you all, like, oh yeah, like when I see Jesus, I'm going to ask why mosquitoes. No, I'm not. Even though I would love to know why mosquitoes. I don't know. What do you two think about that? Am I totally off and just angsty today, or?
So
it's okay to say yes.
Like, I don't think you're totally off. I do think, I mean, I genuinely think that, because I would say I've experienced the opposite, in that people are like, okay, God's the one who took my wife's life or my kid's life or something, and my pastor's the last vestige of a representation of God that I'm willing to talk to. And it's that I have a relationship with her or I have a relationship with him, and it's almost like, okay, this is a trusted friend that will walk with me through this while God is no longer in the equation. And we get the privilege and responsibility of showing where God is in that situation, or being the hands and feet of Christ. So I think that both probably are true, because I do think that people come and challenge me with theological quandaries and questions that they would never ask Jesus in a million years, because of that kind of spiritual peace that I imagine Jesus brings with him. And I do think when people, Keri Robertson posted in there that Keri Robertson posted, questioning brings understanding. And I think that when we do authentically yell at God, I think most people have actually experienced peace from that. Like they've gotten that Holy Spirit moment from that. And so I don't know, I think you're half right, but I also think there are people who legitimately are mad at God, and the pastor or their small group leader is like the last thing they're holding on to try and keep in there. So David, what do you think?
Yeah, well, for me, if there was someone who was really angry at God or upset with God, or have a lot of questions, I usually hear about it from a relative or someone, and I always tell the relative, tell them to come talk to me, or I would love to have a conversation with that person, and I will never see them. And I've found out, this has happened for a long period of time. People who are angry at God, they don't really want to hear from God. And they don't really want to. People who have questions, going back to your David, where you were saying where you have a question. Well, anyways, skip that. So the thing is that they don't want to hear what God has to say. I don't want to ask God this question because I know what God might say, and I don't want that answer. And I'm afraid that God will give me that answer. So I'm kind of afraid to ask, because if it's not the answer that I want, then I don't know how I'm going to respond to that. So it creates this dissonance.
That's good.
So that's my experience. Some people will not come to the pastor. They will not come to a church leader to have those conversations. They'll hold on to those questions in their hearts and let it fester because they are afraid of what God might ask of them. I mean, Jesus just got through saying that he's getting ready to die. That's not something you want to oppose. I'm sure that was probably a serious context. They was probably afraid that Jesus was going to argue that, this is going to happen. It's happening.
I think there's a certain grief in losing the anger. Like the anger becomes the certainty place to live. Like if I'm angry, I know that I'm angry. And if there's a conflict, I know who the enemy is. But if I ask the question and realize that I'm displacing my emotions, or I'm just going through a grief process and I won't be angry eventually, then I'm going to lose the one certain thing that I have right now. And because I'm going to get in this place where all of a sudden I'm not angry and I'm able to live my life, and I don't know what that looks like. So it becomes uncertainty. I want to highlight Steve Batchelor posted in here. Maybe we ask our pastor so we hear an immediate response. And I think there's some truth to that, because what we were, I think David was talking about it earlier, in that Mary and Martha, like Martha was expecting Jesus to come immediately, and Jesus didn't come immediately. So I think there's some comfort level in going to the pastor, because even in the old Catholic way of things, the priest is the voice of God. So,
all right, we have to move on.
Okay.
So speaking of pastors, let's talk about who's the greatest.
That would be me.
According to Nancy.
We all know that. Yeah.
All right, verses 33 through 37. They came to Capernaum, and when he was in the house, he asked them, "What were you arguing about on the way?" But they were silent, for on the way they had argued with one another about who was the greatest. He sat down, called the 12, and said to them, "Whoever wants to be first must be last of all and servant of all." Then he took a little child and put it among them, and taking it in his arms, he said to them, "Whoever welcomes one such child in my name welcomes me, and whoever welcomes me welcomes not me, but the one who sent me." So we need to get through this one quickly, but Jesus uses a child here, and in this culture, children were on the lowest position of the ladder of social relationships, and that's such a powerful moment that Jesus has. I think we don't see children the same way this culture saw children, so it's kind of hard to imagine. But we think about, I think about how much like children can't do for themselves, and so if we were to like shift the way we view things of who can do the most for themselves, children would be like, babies are literally at the bottom because they can't do anything by themselves. And so it's just a really interesting thing that Jesus uses here to kind of paint this picture. And we're having on like children's ministry guru next week for another section where Jesus blesses the children. So we're not going to hang on that point for very long. But what I wanted to kind of ask here, and I think this is going to fit really well contextually with where you both pastor. So I'd like to kind of pose the question of, what is the difference between ambition and drive that we see in a lot of our congregants that we have. We have a lot of very successful type A CEO people that attend our congregation. And David, my dad grew up in East Texas, and I know that Lufkin is the epicenter of what's happening in East Texas. And so I would kind of ask, if somebody's coming to you and saying, okay, Jesus says whoever's first must be last. So, or whoever's last must be first. So I'm going to get the worst grades in medical school so I can be first, even though I'll be last. Like, what would you say to people? What's the difference between ambition and drive and this being first that Jesus is kind of rebuking here?
Yeah, I'll jump on it real quick. So yeah, we're in East Texas. Our largest employer is our LISD, our Lufkin School District, and outside of that, we lost a lot of industries. Lufkin Industries has been lost. A lot of your industry jobs have gone away, and what's left is more like your service industries. So we don't have a lot of CEOs and things like that who are part of our church. But I think what Jesus says here is applicable to no matter where you are on the spectrum of social economic status. What I love about this text is that Jesus does not rebuke the disciples for wanting to be great.
Mm-hmm.
It is not a rebuke of greatness. It's a redefining of greatness. And so Jesus said, yes, I want you to be great. I want everyone to be great. But realize what greatness is. It's not stepping on others. It's not having more than others. It's not being better than others. It's actually being a servant of others. And it was interesting to me. I heard, I was watching one documentary, and that documentary was talking about kings. It was, going through kings. And one of the original duties or jobs of a king, a monarch, was actually to serve the people. That was the main purpose of their position, was to serve the people and not to just to lord it or rule over them. So Jesus does a beautiful job of redefining, even in our modern Western culture, what greatness is. It's being able to give yourself to uplift and serve others. And if you can do that, you can be great. And it was Dr. King that said, I'm glad he redefined it great like this. So that means everyone can be great because everyone can serve.
Yeah, so there's we read Romans earlier, I think it's Romans 12 something, 12:10, that I've used in weddings a lot when I have two people who are highly competitive getting married to each other. And it says, outdo one another in showing honor. And so I was like, well, if you're going to be competitive in being nice to each other and see who can cook the most breakfast in bed and who can do the most back rubs or who can do the most cards left for them or whatever. And so be first, but be first in something that lifts up your neighbor and lifts up your family and lifts up. And because I don't think you're never going to tell a competitive person not to win. I'm better than some, but I hate to lose. And so you like, again, you redefine what that is. And the kid, I think we look at kid as like, we know they're unimportant. Like, we worship our children these days. Let's be honest. We do everything for them. It wasn't just that they were unimportant. It was very much, I think, like, you had more kids in that day, so you had more field hands.
Yeah.
And they were servants. It was go get me a drink, and that was your job as a kid. So I think that for anybody who's going to enter the kingdom of heaven, they're going to be the ones who are going to, let me be the one who goes and gets you the drink the most. And totally redefines the willingness. It's not just I'm going to sit on the throne and lord over you, like you were saying, but it's how do I be the best at being the best servant on the floor with everybody, as opposed to up in the throne. So
yeah, good, great. All right, I'm going to move on. Okay, so this is 38 through 41. John said to him, "Teacher, we saw someone casting out demons in your name. We tried to stop him because he was not following us." But Jesus said, "Do not stop him, for no one who does a deed of power in my name will be able soon afterward to speak evil of me. Whoever is not against us is for us. For truly I tell you, whoever gives you a cup of water to drink because you bear the name of Christ will by no means lose the reward." So in this passage, I think there's a really interesting grammar piece that takes place here. And so the disciples are concerned that this person is not following us. But then Jesus in his response to them says, no one who does a deed of good in my name. Like, hey boys, like, it's not that you're following us, it's what's happening in my name. And so I think there's this piece where Jesus kind of causes the disciples to recognize their allies. It's not like the 12 of them and Jesus against the whole rest of the world. There's this call to recognize your allies. And I think just another like kind of interesting piece to note here, when Jesus talks about the cup of water in verse 41, water is something that's essential for life. It's essential for living, and in a culture that took place mostly in the desert, water meant a whole other, it meant survival. It meant being able to be sustained throughout the day. And so that metaphor, Jesus could have said, whoever gives you a drink of Dr. Pepper, and that would have hit differently than water, right? So the question I would have to pose for you all is that this made me think about the Apostles' Creed, which we say in the traditional service every week, I think. Yes, every week. And so one of the questions that we kind of always get on a consistent basis is, why do we say in the Apostles' Creed, I believe in the Holy Catholic Church, if we're Protestant and Martin Luther did his thing a couple years ago, and we have this whole movement that's not part of the Catholic Church anymore? And then kind of the second question I would want to ask is, based on this passage, what do you think Jesus would have to say to the Holy Catholic Church today, kind of based on what we see his reaction to the disciples here?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, for those of you who don't know, when we say the Apostles' Creed, when we say Holy Catholic Church, it's a little c versus a big C. And Catholic means universal or all-encompassing, versus the proper brand name of what used to be the Holy Roman Catholic Church, that was, that has the Pope as its head. So I think we say that because what early Christianity adopted, it kind of adopted this universal spirit that anybody can be a Christian, and that anybody who believes is part of the church, which I think was co-opted by not only the Catholic denomination, but most denominations have a little bit of a, like, I'll even claim, I'll totally lay out there that as a United Methodist who has an open communion table and generally plays well ecumenically, there are other churches and other preachers in Dallas that they make the news for something, and I'm just like, oh my gosh, they're not a real Christian. And I, like, because I just totally disagree with them, which is not what Jesus says to do here. Jesus is completely calling me out there. So I think specifically to your question, what would God say to the Holy Catholic Church? I think it's the same thing that, maybe a little bit more specific, but God would say to me, or Jesus would say to me too, is that wouldn't it be great if, aren't we just blessed that those people are doing something in my name? Even if they're not doing it exactly the way that you want it to be done, they're not walking up the stairs 3 times backwards and saying 4 Our Fathers and 5 Hail Marys. Aren't you glad they're on our team? And this story, actually, it harkens back to another story in Numbers where these people are like prophesying in the camp, and Joshua, of all people, runs to Moses and rats him out and tells him. And Moses is like, wouldn't it be great if everybody was prophesying in my name? And I think, and I'm going to go, sorry, this is getting long-winded, but I did a sermon series about Christianity's family tree, and I got to go actually, talk to a priest about Catholic beliefs and all. And it was real fascinating because he kind of talked for a little while about, well, no, we believe that God is the God of all people, but we believe that we're the one true manifestation of his church. And so, yes, God encompasses all of creation, but if you really want to be on his team, you got to do what we say in a very direct way. So I do think that, but I think we're probably pigeonholing the Catholic Church a little bit if we weren't honest with ourselves. In that, when I look down the road and see a church that is not as grace-based as I think, I get very less grace-based and say, well, man, if everyone just did things the way I would do it, we'd be people wouldn't be leaving the church if they all did things the way that I do it. And then I look and see that, the reason people are leaving the church is because we're hypocritical, which I just did. So.
Yeah.
Yeah. That was a long-winded answer. Sorry.
No, great. No, that's very good. Yeah. Yeah, you kind of stepped on my toes too, David.
Sorry about that.
Thank you for being our guest. We're gonna really step on your toes now.
No,
That's
I
what.
think that there's just a lot of tribalism, and tribalism is it goes completely against God's vision for the church. Paul talks about in Corinthians how we are to be this body. He uses the metaphor of a body, and tribalism is so contagious because it's so easy to dim someone else's light so yours can appear to shine brighter. And we get caught up into that. And then our culture in America is so polarized, and you find yourself becoming more polarized just to let people know that you're not with that group. So Methodists become more Methodist when there's a Baptist church next to them. And and it's just unfortunate because it's not God's vision for it.
Yeah. Okay, we have to finish. I've got 10 minutes to get through
10 minutes.
cutting people's arms off. So it'll be great. Okay, so
Let's just take this one literally and move on.
Or not. It's great. You already made my point for me. So verses 42 through 50. It's fine. Okay, it says, if any of you put a stumbling block before one of these little ones who believe in me, it would be better for you if a great millstone were hung around your neck and you were thrown into the sea. If your hand causes you to stumble, cut it off. It is better for you to enter life maimed than to have two hands and go to hell, to the unquenchable fire. And if your foot causes you to stumble, cut it off. It is better for you to enter life lame than to have 2 feet and to be thrown into hell. And if your eye causes you to stumble, tear it out. It is better for you to enter the kingdom of God with one eye than to have 2 eyes and be thrown into hell, where their worm never dies and their fire is never quenched. For everyone will be salted with fire. Salt is good, but if salt has lost its saltiness, how can you season it? Have salt in yourself. So Jesus is saying it's fine to be salty. I'm just saying. But then he says, and be at peace with one another. So he's not. So I titled this section Misinterpretation Station, because one, I read The Handmaid's Tale this summer. And if you've never read The Handmaid's Tale, it's a apocalyptic work that was written in the 70s by Margaret Atwood about a world that takes the Bible literally. And the way that women are treated in this world is really fascinating to think about and terrifying. But one of the really pivotal scenes in the book is when a woman has her eye gouged out because she mouthed off in a meeting or in a training. And so there are major, obvious, more than The Handmaid's Tale, major dangers into misinterpreting this passage. So unless I'm assuming neither one of you disagree with me that people should not go around cutting their hands off. Just speak now. You're on the internet, so
I'm okay agreeing with you on that. Yeah.
Thanks. But I do think that this it's very dramatic language, and I think Jesus uses the wonderful use of hyperbole here to make a point about how serious Jesus is about the way we treat one another, because we talk about this, I think, in such individual ways, right? My hand caused me to sin, so I'm going to cut it off. But Jesus starts the whole conversation with, if any of you put a stumbling block before one of the little ones who believe in me. It's about relationship.
Is the destructive nature of mistreating one another, where Christ lifts up the greatest commandment is to love your neighbor just as yourself. And we sometimes think that that's just nice Christian talk, but the alternative is to have a cold outlook toward your neighbor and the people that's next to you, or to mistreat, or to hate, or to loathe the person that you are meant to be in community with and do life. I just think it's something very destructive, self-destructive, about living in a society where people fail to love one another, respect one another, give dignity to one another. You're ultimately destroying yourself, because that society will never be healthy as long as there's someone in it that's not allowed to participate.
Yeah, I think there's a little bit in here. So I think Jesus uses hyperbole like a pro, and I always appreciate because even my reference to the duck-billed platypus came out earlier is like completely absurd hyperbole, and I think Jesus uses like absurdity to make a huge point, to overemphasize. I do think this passage is a little bit of a intentional juxtaposition to the last passage to talk somewhat about our own personal discipline and faith, but also a corporate community. The last passage is about, well, shoot, shouldn't we just be glad that people are on our team and doing something and giving water for Christ, versus this, and they're active, like they're living out their faith, even though they're not part of our little club. And this is, well, yeah, you're part of the club, but are you really? Like, you're part of the club, but you're mistreating children in our Sunday school. And you're part of the club, and yet you profess this great faith on Sunday, but on Monday you go and you cheat your employees out of their IRAs or something. And so I do think there's like high hyperbole. We should not throw people into lakes with millstones. I actually do think Jesus is saying that it would be better if you didn't call yourself part of the club than to soil the name. And I think about like if you get a good, think of a stale potato chip. Like a great potato chip has a lot of salt on it, and it's really satisfying. But a stale potato chip doesn't have the salt, and it doesn't taste very good, and it's really crumbly. And if our witness to the world is supposed to be everything that's great about God and everything that's great about Christ, but people are looking and all they're seeing are stale people and stale potato chips, then it's probably better for them to look at somebody else. So I don't think Jesus is asking us to cut off hands and gouge out eyes and do all those things, but I do think it is a juxtaposition of like, I'd rather have the people who are out doing something in my name versus the people who are calling themselves part of the club who just want to sit on the throne and not help anybody, or not do their job. Because I do think David said it really well, and that to have a world where somebody's excluded is never going to be the kingdom of God. But I think that we're not going to inspire people toward the kingdom of God if we're not actually doing anything to inspire them. And in fact, I think, I can't remember who it was, but there's a meme that goes around the internet sometimes. It's like, sometimes the best evangelism you can have is to call yourself a Christian and not be a jerk. And I think this is I think that Jesus is saying, like, sometimes you just need to get out of your own way and let me work through you, and don't intentionally doing something harm. So I do think there's some rough edges to the passage, more so than just hyperbole. I do think Jesus very honestly says, like, kind of get out of my way if you're not going to be a part of this. Which again, I will go in and say, because I ascribe to the version, if there's a version of hell that I actually like, which is a weird saying, it's C.S. Lewis's version, which is C.S. Lewis version, which is like the Great Divorce, is like people get to go before Jesus and they have door number 1 and door number 2, and hell is self-selective, like the doors are locked from the inside. And so I think this is still Jesus making a self-selective thing of like, look, if you're gonna hurt yourself, if you're going to do this, it's going to hurt the movement. So if you want to keep doing that, go destroy yourself. But if you really want to be part of something really wonderful, stop. Because we're going to bring the preservation that salt brings. We're going to bring the tastiness that salt brings. The world's going to be so much better if you'll just say, look, I believe, but help my unbelief, and I'm going to walk with you here. So.
Yeah. I think that on that positive note, no, I think it's great. People are relieved. We don't want them to cut off their arms. So,
right.
But
I'm just trying to bring some jerky Jesus back in here.
Listen, it doesn't have to be brought. It's already brought.
It's already brought.
No, I think that, this is such a dangerous passage. So I
Mm-hmm.
think both of you had really great takes on it, that I hope are, I don't know, on a billboard somewhere someday or something.
We'll make
Just
all of our non-cliche bumper stickers, all of our prophetic bumper stickers. We'll make
I'm
zero
in.
money in our business, but
This
we'll.
would be a great Etsy shop. I'm in on like not like tough nugget bumper stickers. That's what we'll call it.
Have you ever, those motivational pictures, and they say like ambition or teamwork, and they have the rowers. Have you ever
Right.
seen the contrary ones that are like failure or
Demotivation.
apathy?
Oh, I gotta look for those.
Oh
They're
man, I
great.
think, what do they call, demotivational posters or something?
Demotivational posters. You just search, yeah.
Oh
They're
my
everywhere.
gosh, they're hysterical. But that's what it makes me think of, like, you walk into a church and it's like, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want, and you got all these really positive things. And I'm curious, like, if someone ever made a hallway that was, go ahead and throw yourself into a lake with a millstone, or, cut off your hand if you do this.
Yeah. Oh, bless it. So I'm out of questions. David Briggs, thank you for being our guest
Yeah,
and
David,
for
thanks for hopping on.
providing such fabulous input and insight and brilliance, to this whole operation.
David, Keri, thank you for giving me the opportunity. Creekwood, it was a blessing to be able to join you for Bible study today. So it was great. I hope something was said or discussed that would encourage you during these times.
I think it totally was. And share a quick story. We had an APL Zoom check-in the other day, and David was on there, and he put up this, like, fake Zoom background of just an outside of a Starbucks in Lufkin, or outside of a coffee shop. And he was just sitting there, and I was like, oh, David's got a nice spot outside. And it wasn't until he moved that I realized this was like a green screen thing. And I was just totally thrown off for the whole rest of the Zoom call.
That's
So,
incredible.
David, by the comments here, it is very apparent, David, that you were a blessing to us tonight. So thank you so much for jumping on. I love talking to you anyway, and so I'm glad that you were here.
Yeah, same, my friend.
Awesome. All right, everyone. We are going to sign off. This is going out on the internet, so I don't know how appropriate it is, but if everyone remembers Monkey the cat, we can use some prayers, because we're not so sure Monkey's going to make it through the night, which has caused lots of tears at our place. But David, Monkey used to make an appearance every week during Bible study, and kind of became our Bible study mascot. And it's been kind of a heartbreaking day around the Lessner household. So prayers for us, and prayers for everybody. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. We'll be back next week with Leanne Hadley, who's kind of a children's ministry guru in the United Methodist Church, and one of Keri Lynn Lucas's personal heroes.
I am going to pass out in the first 10 minutes, and y'all are going to have to come wake me up to do Bible study. It's going to be fantastic.
It's going to be good that I'm the MC next week. So, all right, everybody, we're going to sign off. Have a good night.
Night.